What I'm going to do today for you really is just give you a little potted history of me, where I've come from and how I've got to where I am today. And then I'm going to do a presentation, a whistle-stop presentation actually, about the Avoiding Karma book, because the Avoiding Karma book is the latest book, and actually it was derived from a series of blogs that I did over 2012, 2013. And it's now become a book. Okay. So I've been involved in metaphysics from the age of 4 actually, and at a very early age I started to meditate. And during one of my meditations, I was approached by 4 white robed individuals who told me that what I was doing was right, but it wasn't the right time for me. So I spent all my teenage years meditating and then stopped. From that point onwards, I did what everybody else does. I became, a very materialistic individual. I went through my career, became a middle manager, got 2 master's degrees because I sought to become, academically qualified. Became a chartered engineer, and really, met my wonderful wife. We built a house together and just did everything everybody else did. And then, sort of round about 1999, 2000, I was introduced to Reiki through a friend of mine who was part of one of my master's degrees, and at the same time I embarked upon another form of energy healing by a lady called Barbara Brennan through one of her first generation students. And it was during the learning of this that I learned how to move up and down the frequencies to a certain point. Now, a friend of mine who was also involved in Reiki, he went to Sweden to work for a car company called Saab at the time, and he invited me over for a cheap holiday because there was cheap flights. There was a bit of a price war at that point, and we managed to get over to Sweden for about £19.50 return, which was a ridiculous price. During that time in Sweden, I received an attunement, which I can only classify as being from an external force, a series of aliens, which really changed the way I was working. So my energy healing changed as well, and I noticed that I could go further up the frequency levels that we were using to heal people on the different auric layers by a completely different methodology than that I was being taught. And so I was able to go further and further and further. And so I started to experiment in trying to get different ways of making it robust. So I developed a system which I now teach actually, or part of it I teach to people to do this. But it allowed me to move up the different frequency levels and go into those universes that are there and the different entities that are there as well. And within those entities I managed to really communicate with another series of entities which were very, very high up the frequency level. One of those eventually announced itself as being our source, our God, and later I got in contact with its creator, what the Hindus call the Absolute, but I was told to call the Origin. And so, over a period of years, I started to journal what I was receiving and write it down. And I think round about 2006, I started to realise that the information I was receiving was good enough to create a book out of, because I was looking at other people's work and I thought, oh, this is interesting, and there's some correlation in these respects. And I think round about 2004 I stopped reading people's books anyway, because I was worried about whether the information I was receiving from them was going to go into my subconscious and be regurgitated out. So really it was my meditations that I started to journal that became the first book, The History of God. And I found I could go further and further and further with my meditations. I managed to go beyond the multiversal environments that our source entity told us was what we're here to experience, to help us experience, learn and evolve, and pass that information back to God. And then I continued later and found I could go beyond those energies or those frequency levels that were associated with our multiverse, that I was told was the structure that we were supposed to work with, and go to areas where there were other source entities, other gods, that were doing their own thing to evolve as well, and eventually communicate with the Origin as well, the Absolute. And those became other books, Beyond the Source Book 1 and Beyond the Source Book 2. Now, in between all of this, I was receiving information for my website to do blogs, postings once or twice a week. And some of those blogs were to do with avoiding karma, because karma is a completely misunderstood concept to most of us. And that became a weekly thing. There was 2 blogs per week about avoiding karma. And I started to notice a trend there as well, where hang about, this is going to be very important, because we think that karma is pretty, pretty, as I say, describable. We understand it, or we think we understand it. And so the book Avoiding Karma, which is what I'm going to talk about now, really starts to pull out the detail of what karma is and how it affects us. This is what I want to talk about now. Because I want to talk about and give you a correct definition and why we accrue karma. And the fact that we've got 5 genres of karma, which are really thought-based karma, behaviour-based karma, physical sensation-based karma, materialism-based karma, and status-based karma. So there's a whole group of different ways of looking at things in terms of how we accrue karma, and what our ultimate goal is as well. And at the end of it we can have a chat about this. Well, a modern misconception of karma is its cause and effect, which it is largely, but it's understanding what that cause and effect is. And we think of it as being something as simple as throwing Granny off a cliff in one lifetime, and then the next lifetime we've got to experience it the other way around, with Granny throwing us off a cliff, for instance. We have to experience that which we've done to somebody else. And it's not specifically that. It's about a whole multitude of different things in how we exist and how we work with the physical universe, our environment right now. So a correct definition of karma is actually the attraction and the addiction to low frequency behaviour patterns or actions. And they specifically operate within the physical universe. Now, we exist in a multiversal environment, and within the multiverse there's around 408 frequency levels. And each of those, by and large, each of those frequency levels is a simultaneous universe in its own right. That's a whole universe in its own right within each of those frequency levels. Except the first universe, which needs 12 frequency levels, because the frequencies are so low that it hasn't got the resolution to provide a universal environment. Now the thing with the physical universe is to experience it properly, we need to come and live in it properly. And we use the human vehicle, the human body, to experience it in a most profound way. Because otherwise, if we were energetic still, we wouldn't be able to touch these things, for instance, and feel the feedback and understand where things go. So we work with it very profoundly and very integrated in the way we work. And so really, karma is about how we work with this environment, and the fact that we can get addicted to it, and the different ways of getting addicted to it, and the fact that we need to come back for 2 reasons. 1, because we want to come back to experience it again and again and again, and 2, because actually we need to sort out the addiction and get ourselves beyond the addiction. Okay. So a correct definition of karma is the fact that karma only exists here. So this karmic content, this addiction, is only because we're coming here. And it exists when our true energetic selves, sometimes called the Oversoul, sometimes called the Godhead, sometimes called the higher self, desires a part of itself, an aspect of itself, what we call the soul, to come back again and experience some part of it. And this need to come back, the desire to come back, is called karma. So this is the physical link, this is the karmic cycle, the fact we're needing to come back, the fact we're having to come back to sort ourselves out, to move beyond this cycle. Now, there's 5 basic genres of karma. And the first one is this thought-based karma. And these are thoughts that revolve around our humanity, that make us human-centric. Not human-centric in terms of working with ourselves as individuals and with groups of people, but our belief that the human form is what we are. We're not thinking outside of the box, so to speak. It's limited thinking, there's no expansion. And those thoughts anchor us to the physical universe. They make us stay here. They make us believe that this is what we are in every way, shape or form. And it's also what we think of others. So when we think about working with different people, interfacing with different people, and we think, oh, I like that person because of this, or I don't like this person because of that. Again, it's thinking in human terms, in physical terms. So this leads us on to behaviour-based karma, where we operate in certain ways. And one way of being involved in behaviour-based karma is seeking personal gain through others. Taking the credit for somebody else's work, for instance, is a classic example of that. And seeing the worst in others as well, which is again where we should be looking beyond that and seeing where people do things the way they do because they're also experiencing learning and evolving, and realising that they say certain things because they're having to work in certain ways, and we can forgive them if we want to. So it's understanding that. Now, gossip is a big one. We always talk about somebody and something, and we shouldn't really be doing that because it involves us in the human aspect again, in the low frequency aspect. So we should be avoiding gossip at all costs. The use of poor language, not being able to articulate ourselves properly, is another way, because it drags us down to another frequency level, which is where we are not really separating ourselves out from lower organisms on the planet, really, because we're starting to use and think in a very low frequency way. And this links in with aggressive tendencies, doesn't it, really? You find that people who use poor language tend to be aggressive all the time and wanting to fight people or argue with people or do something to somebody else which is negative, for instance. And also it's the evasion of responsibilities, not taking ownership for when we do something wrong. It's wrongdoing, those sorts of things. That's behaviour based aspects of karma. And then we've got the physical sensation based karma, when we get addicted to other things that are sensory based. The classic one is sex. Now, sex is great if we use it for procreation and it's done in a loving way, and we start going off track. Then we want to do and have this sexual act for personal requirements and not for loving requirements or procreation requirements. And if we're doing it in the right way, there's no problem. It's when we get addicted to the need to do it, then that becomes again sensation-based karma. Another one is food. We have we must have certain foods, must have access to certain foods. We can't live without food, and food becomes an addiction in its own right. For instance, going to certain restaurants, having certain foods, experiencing certain things in those respects. That's another one. Another one is clearly alcohol. I mean, alcohol's fine if it's taken in the right quantities in the right way and is used for what it is. But it's when we need to have more and more and we can't live without it, we get addicted and we become alcoholic and those sorts of sense. And this also leads us into drugs as well, because drugs are also an addiction, aren't they? We seek the effects that we get through having drugs, and it's that effect which links us into the need to have the drugs. We get addicted to the drug cycle as well. Again, another one is body condition. How many of us want to have six packs or good shapely waists? It's not essential to having those. As long as we look after our bodies, we're fine. But we want to look good, physically look good, because it's something we think we should be. But again, the addiction to it, the wanting to look good and continue to look good, is an attraction to lower frequency existence. And then sometimes we get a problem with personal self-abuse, where we like to cut ourselves, we like to experience the pain, and that's another form of addiction that brings us down to the human level, the low frequency level. And again, another one is dangerous sports, where we seek the adrenaline rush, skiing fast down the mountains, driving fast cars, jumping out of aeroplanes because we get the rush of falling and then is my parachute really going to open? Those sorts of things, or water skiing fast. All of these things where we're doing dangerous sports, or even martial arts, for instance. If we get addicted to them, we need to do them, then it becomes a problem because it brings us down to this level. This leads us quite nicely onto materialism-based karma, where we have this need to have more and more things, bigger and better things, and we can't move away from that. We always want to have something more. We've never got enough. Okay, and so it's things like we need to have excessive money, for instance. We need to own certain things, like certain cars, Mercedes-Benz cars, for instance, a nice posh house in the right area, for instance, to wear the right sort of clothes, things like Gucci clothes or Armani clothes, those sort of things, which are very nice, but we need to have the right sort of brand associated with them. It's all part of it. So to own certain forms of transport and multiple forms of those transports, like 2 or 3 cars, 2 or 3 motor cars, boats, and all these sort of things, it's all to do with how we look at ourselves. That we've got lots of things around us, and the need to have all these lots of things around us anchor us here, because we then have to be responsible for them, and they take up our time. They change our focus away from progressing ourselves from esoteric and a spiritual perspective, but focusing on the material world. And again, something else is taking expensive holidays. We must have an expensive holiday so we can brag about it to our friends and those sorts of things. So that leads us into status-based karma, where a lot of these things I've talked about from a materialistic perspective we use for showing off. We show off our personal wealth, we show off our possessions, we socialise with certain people in certain places, in certain exclusive restaurants, in certain exclusive clubs and those sorts of things. This need to be surrounded by certain people or in certain establishments is another way of bringing ourselves down, because we're still associating with this earthly perspective. So all of these things are starting to bring us down, bringing our energy down. Again, having certain careers, you know, how many people want to be a lawyer because it's got status? How many people want to be a doctor because it's got status? You know, at the end of the day, the person who sweeps the streets is probably one of the most important people on the planet, keeping our environments clean for us. You know, the people who clean our offices, for instance, they keep us clean as well. Again, we seek to be a high achiever, don't we? We want our children to be top performers at school, getting A grades, A+ grades, these sorts of things. These are, again, bringing us down to, you know, the earth level as well, keeping us here. And wanting to be famous, wow. All of these reality shows these days, are a real problem, basically, because everybody wants to be famous. And some people want to be famous because they're famous. And it's difficult, again, this brings you into this status issue, this material wealth situation. So all of these things keep us low. And this also wants us to be powerful as well, because we're famous, we've got lots of money, we're powerful, lots of wealth, lots of belongings, makes us feel powerful as well. So this brings us to what the ultimate goal is. And the ultimate goal really is to move out of that, okay? It's to observe ourselves and avoid things that can create a link with the lower frequencies associated with the physical universe. Because we're only here to experience it, really, and work with it. And then we move back into the energetic again, because we are energy beings. We're sentient energy that comes here to experience the minute detail of the multiverse, to experience, to learn and evolve, and we pass that evolutionary content back to our higher self, our true energetic self, and back to our creator, our God, our source entity, which passes it back onto its creator. And so the objective is really to be in the physical, but not of it. And so therefore we can avoid karma in the process of doing it. And if we can avoid karma, we can move out of the karmic cycle, we actually avoid the need to reincarnate. And therefore we can progress and evolve without coming down this low down the frequencies. And if we can do that, we've cracked the evolutionary curve and we can move on and not bother to come here again. And that is how to avoid karma, by recognising all of these different things and moving forwards. Okay. Anybody got any questions on karma? Yes. And good karma actually is the opposite. Good karma is when we start to do good things, like recognising what we're doing. I wouldn't say wrong, but that we're getting attracted to a downward spiral in certain things, and we can start to negate it. If we observe ourselves, and we can start to correct our behaviour patterns and our thought processes, we start to move up this curve. So we don't engage in gossip, we don't engage in negative thoughts, we don't engage in aggressive tendencies, we don't worry about what people think of ourselves. We can move further up the frequencies that way. And we get to the point where we don't get concerned in an instantaneous situation. So we can forgive and forget people instantaneously. When somebody says something against us, rather than getting upset, we recognise that they've got their own evolutionary curve to work with, and we forgive them and forget what they've done. They don't get a karma linking it with us, we don't get pulled down the frequencies, and we start to move upwards. And when we start to move up the frequencies, we start to get access to other functionality, because we're higher frequency. So we start to achieve things like gaining better intuition, gaining better spiritual sight, and some of the higher functionalities associated with becoming higher frequency. So we start to get things like telepathy, psychometry, and precognition, clairaudience, clairvoyance, clairsentience. And so if we move up by using the other side of karma, which is releasing the need to be here, by self-observation, we can ascend the frequency as well at the same time. It's a well-known fact that Certainly in India, the guru, when he accepts a student, or when she accepts a student, will take a portion of that karma from the student to give them a kickstart, basically, so that they can move further, faster. Because the guru understands, or the teacher understands, what karma is, they can work with it, and they can dissipate that karma within themselves much quicker than the student can. So in taking that karma on board and then releasing it by introspection, observation and change of behaviour process, they remove that karma, they sever the links with the students for the karmic cycles and the other links with the other people that those karmic links have achieved, and the students can move up faster because they're given a head start. They're put on this pedestal where they can be introspective and self-observant almost straight away, and therefore they move up quite quickly, as against where people who are doing it on their own, they've got to work through this very difficult process of accepting that we are having to work in an environment where we can get sucked into different things or get attracted to different things, and we have to become self-aware and self-observant. More importantly, becoming able to recognise that when we're doing things wrong and accept it, taking responsibility for it. And so the association with the guru, the teacher, removes that first part and gives them a head start. In some of my workshops I teach people how to move their consciousness, project their consciousness up into the different frequency levels associated with the multiverse. And in doing so you naturally bring your frequencies up anyway. So in doing those exercises, and even just opening and closing the chakras brings you up the frequencies, then you start to get associated with those frequencies, and as a result of that you do start to remove this karma, because you start to become introspective naturally. You start to avoid those thoughts and behaviour patterns and actions naturally anyway. So that helps as well. Thank you. Actually, I received an email today from one of my students asking this very similar question, and it's something like 20% of 1% of people on the planet. Yeah? That's 0.2 of 1% of the people on the planet are able to work or think in this way on any level, whether it's master level or whether it's just starting out level. So there's a wide spectrum there of how people are responding to it, but it's it's a very low number. And the next question would be, well, how many do we need to have as a critical mass to move us up? I would guess, and that's around 10% to start the triangulation process, which is essential through association with others. If you mix with good company, you start to think the same thought processes and have the same behaviour patterns as people in good company. If you just mix with bad company, you do the opposite, don't you? You associate yourself with them and you start to work in their ways. So it needs around 10% before we start to get this exponential growth curve start to work, and then other people get involved and they start to ascend the frequencies and start to work in a better, a more evolved way.
Isn't it as long as we are in the human body, there is a kind of a vicious circle?
The objective is to be in the human body and move out of that vicious circle. The vicious circle being a downward spiral of karma, where we're not learning our lessons and it keeps hitting us again. And sometimes the intensity of that lesson is harder and harder and harder until we wake up. And so while we're in the physical body, it is difficult to move out of it. But that's the whole point. The whole point of us being here is to evolve. And part of the evolutionary curve is to move out of this association with karma, this attraction to low frequency behaviours and actions.
And it seems it's not like we're in a body, there is the gravity that you can't fly.
Yeah.
So maybe it's, in a way it's almost an impossible mission.
It's difficult. It's not impossible, it's difficult.
Almost.
Yeah. It's not impossible, it's difficult. But the whole point of it is that at some point, some of us will be able to incarnate and exist in this and not accrue any karma at all, because we're in the physical but we're not of it. And there are a number of illumined masters who've reached that, and they've managed it. And you can spot them. You can spot them because they're not fazed by anything. They don't take offence by anything. They're able to work with the material world and not get attracted to it and not need to have certain things, or not be associated with certain people, or have certain levels of belongings, or have certain status. They just move around it, and it's like the Hindus call it the old Paramahansa. Okay, you're like a swan, just floating very gently when everything else is choppy water around you. It's this bit in the background. So the question is, how far ahead in the future is this critical mass going to appear? Well, actually we're moving quite fast right now. So it's probably going to be outside of our lifetime, but within 100 years, and I've just been told around 60, we'll start to see big changes. 60 years time.
What might those big changes be?
Well, we can start to see the changes already, actually, with certain individuals, because people who were not interested in things of spirit, of the energetic, start to become interested. Those who were start to get higher functionality, like they start to become more clairvoyant, more clairsentient, more clairaudient. They start to develop their own functionality and trust it and work with it, and they start to realise that this is a very transient environment, a very momentary environment that we're in, and they start to see beyond the veil of what it is, and they'll start to see the other entities that are with us now at the different frequency levels. So all of these different functionalities will start to pop out, and the more you work with it, the higher the frequencies you go, and the higher the frequencies you go, the more you see it, the more you experience it, the more you work with it, and that's the upward spiral. That's part of the exponential growth. So around 60 years.